This is the Gateway 300 SE. Manufactured in 2002, it retailed for $600, and this particular model would have been equipped with a 1.3 GHz Pentium 3 based Celeron, 128 megs of RAM, a 20 GB hard drive, Windows XP, and no discrete graphics. The previous owner did a few modifications: a GeForce 4 MX 4000 graphics card, 2 fast Ethernet cards, completely different hard drives, and 256 megs of additional RAM. It's certainly better than stock, but the case didn't have it as good. The side panel is bent, the front panel has yellowed quite a bit, there are some nasty scuffs on it, it's got this random Grand Targhee sticker on it, which admittedly is not a bad thing. And dust. Lots and lots of dust. I could just clean it out and call it a day, but instead I'm going to overhaul this PC and see what kind of performance I can get out of it. So without further ado, let's take a look at the parts. The star of the show is the case. It's a Rosewheel FBM05 I got from Newegg for $30, mainly because it's the smallest one I could find that would fit all my components. Make no mistake, this is a budget case, but the build quality isn't bad and I really like its appearance. It has a lot in common with the Ranger M that's made an appearance on the channel a few times. Moving on, I picked up a 1.33 GHz Pentium 3 from eBay, mainly because of the higher front side bus speed. I already had another 256 MB stick of PC-133 on hand, so I replaced the pre-installed 128 MB stick with it. I'm pretty sure that 128 MB stick wasn't stock because it was PC-100 and ECC. Where it came from is anyone's guess. The hard drives definitely aren't stock either. One is an ancient 13 GB Maxtor drive that held the OS for some reason, and the other drive is another Maxtor with a 200 GB capacity and much faster access speeds which stored something. I replaced these with two 500 GB Western Digital drives. They're expensive at $45 each, but they're quiet, fast, and reliable. I could have gone for cheaper SATA drives and used an adapter a la Phil's Computer Lab, but I prefer the authentic approach, and these drives are second to none in that regard. I of course had to upgrade the GPU, and I used none other than the GeForce 6200, which starred in my last two videos. This is the project I originally bought the card for, and I'm sure you're all tired of it by now. The optical drives are obviously not stock, but the originals didn't work and I threw them out before I started on this video. These are Samsung SHS-222A drives, so named for their ability to write DVDs at 22 times speed. Realistically, I'll never need to use two DVD drives at once, but it felt wrong to go from two drives to just one. Finally, I figured this machine had potential as a homebrew router, so I swapped out the original Ethernet cards for two D-Link DGE 530T gigabit cards that I picked up new on eBay for $7 each. That's a project for another time, but for now they'll let me get the most out of my existing router. At this point, the only stock parts I'll be using are the power supply, motherboard, and floppy drive. And speaking of floppy drive, this one has a white faceplate, and I'll be installing it in a black case. It'll be ugly, but it works, and I can either replace it with a black one later, or spray paint the faceplate. Well, who needs matching color schemes anyway? Now that's all for the parts, let's get the build going. If you'd like to skip the build section, the link is on the screen now. Moving from the Gateway case to the Rosewheel case was a bit of a challenge. The first problem I ran into was in transplanting the motherboard. Gateway decided to use hex head screws to secure the motherboard rather than the ubiquitous Phillips screws, but luckily I have a screwdriver that I got for a few dollars at Walmart that will get the job done. Once I got these screws out, removing the motherboard was easy. There was another problem though. Instead of having a standard metal I/O shield like, well, pretty much every other PC out there, Gateway made it part of the case itself, and provided a small foam piece to separate the case and the motherboard. I was able to peel it off of the old case and insert it into the new one, but it was a hassle to do. The gray color does look nice though. Once the motherboard and I/O foam were installed, it was time to replace the CPU. The cooler is secured to the socket via clips attached to the heatsink, and getting it off requires pushing down on one of the clips with a flathead screwdriver. From there, replacing the CPU is as easy as lifting this arm, removing the current CPU, inserting the new one, and lowering the arm. Next, you need to apply thermal paste. I usually use a Q-tip to paint on the paste because this ice fusion paste doesn't come with an applicator. I also need to remove the old paste from the heatsink, and I do this with a tissue. It's not perfect, but for an old CPU like this that doesn't put out much heat, it'll do. Once the heatsink is clean, it needs to be reattached to the CPU, again using the flathead screwdriver, and can't forget to plug in the fan too. The next step was to install the power supply, which to my surprise wouldn't fit. The original gateway case had more height to it, which allowed the side-mounted fan to protrude from the power supply without being an issue. The Rosewell case is more compact and will need to make some modifications for everything to fit. Fortunately, I just had to remove the CPU cooler and the metal plate covering the PSU fan. Installing the PSU first and the cooler second worked, but there is literally zero clearance between the two. Fortunately, the fan can still spin freely. And from there I wired up the main power connector through the case's cutouts, and another weird thing about this PSU is that the fan has its own lead that needs to be plugged into the motherboard. This decision makes no sense at all to me, but that's just how it is. Upgrading the RAM was next, but this part was just like any other build, and nothing particularly interesting happened. Hooking up the front panel connectors to the motherboard, though, was a pain. I knew the front USB 3.0 port would be useless due to the age of the board, so I routed that cable to the back side of the case and just left it there. This motherboard doesn't support front panel audio either, so I had to hide that as well. At least the USB 2.0 header was easy to find. The simplicity stops there, though. The original gateway case has a front panel connector that was sparse at best. That wouldn't be a big deal, but the motherboard provides no indication of where to plug the leads in, so I pretty much just had to guess. That worked rather well, as everything just worked after that. Next up were the GPU and network adapters. The only thing of interest about this part were the case's temporary slot covers that you have to remove before installing cards. Once those were gone, everything else was cake. I installed the hard drives next. This part is pretty much the same as with any other case that doesn't have toolless drive bays. An important thing to note when building in a small case is the order that you install the parts. It's best to install the hard drives now before any other parts get in the way, because they do hang over the motherboard and can cause issues later on. Next, I need to install the floppy drive and optical drives. This went smoothly as well. I just had to pull on the case's front panel from the bottom to detach it, then pop out the plastic covers for the 3.5 and 5.25 inch drive bays. There were some more temporary metal covers that I had to remove, but once I did that, the drive slotted in easily. The last things to do were to hook up the data and power cables for all of the drives. I started with power, trying to use the layout of the case to my advantage. Next was the floppy drive's ribbon cable, and then the hard drives, and finally the optical drives. And there you go. The transition from old to slightly less old is finished, so let's test a few games and see how much faster this machine really is. So, the results are in, and with all the upgrades we made to this PC, we got an average increase of just under 35% to the average frame rate. I was expecting better, but you have to consider that there's only so much a Pentium 3 and PCI graphics card can do. Even so, I was happy with the way this project turned out. The PC feels more clean and up-to-date, and the 1TB of storage gives me plenty of space to store any retro game I want, with room to spare. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.